Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to the Equidemia podcast. My name is Celina Skogan. I am your host and I'm the founder of Equidemia, a platform working on the intersection of science and practice with a clear focus on understanding horses rather than constantly trying to correct them. Together with you, we try to rethink horse training and raise it to a more ethical, more empathic level. This podcast is never about quick fixes. It's not about methods or recipes. It's about context, perception, and how to put that into practice and put that into a context that makes our life with horses in the end lighter, happier, and just so much more enjoyable for everybody involved, four or two leg. Today's episode is a little different because I would like to invite you into a think tank, into a little project of mine. And it's also not a standalone topic. It's a conceptual opening to our upcoming summit, Inside the Horse's Mind. And I want to start it with a single question. And that is a question that is keeping me busy since quite a while, at least weeks, if not years. And that question is, what if horses are not showing problem behavior at all? What if that what we label as resistance, conflict, or dysfunction is actually very normal behavior expressed under very abnormal conditions? That is a question I have discussed very long with my masterclass in the last year and also during our summer meetings up in Norway. And today I would like to invite you into this think tank and follow my thoughts and maybe add some on your own. So welcome and enjoy the new episode. For me, that was a question that changed everything. And to give it a little bit context, this question comes from a human trauma research context, because their behavior is no longer framed primarily as functional or dysfunctional, but as meaningful and logical adaptation to an environment that is overwhelming or unsafe. I heard this question recently in a different podcast in exactly that context, and it stayed with me because I have been observing behavioral challenges or behavioral changes for quite a while. And this question is really putting it down into a nutshell. But let me take you along the road, because it changes everything, right? When we are discussing it like this, and don't think that the behavior itself is a problem that we need to correct, but that the behavior is a totally meaningful and logical adaptation to the environment. We are asking a very rare question in the horse world, and that is our definition of normal behavior. That is our definition of where's the baseline. Maybe we aren't misreading horses at all. Maybe we are reading them from a shifted baseline. Let that sink in for a little moment. Because when we talk about behavior in horses, we usually talk about deviations. Too spooky, too sensitive, too dominant, too lazy, too explosive, too apathic. But we almost never ask the more fundamental question: what is this behavior deviating from? Our reference point for normal is rarely the biologically healthy, regulated horse that is living within its environment and within its family group. It's what we see every day, which is creating our baseline. And when everyday reality consists of horses living with chronic tension, limited movement, restricted social contact, often a big change in the social group, and constant expectations to function, our perception is shifting, as is the baseline, what is normal for our horses. Frequency becomes confused with normality and normality with health. Not everything that is common is biologically also normal. And this is where I would like to take you along. Of course, I have prepared a little bit of research for us. This is where research becomes essential. And this is where I would like to take you along into some evidence-based papers. Over the past decades, there were many studies done. And the studies where I think that they are often outstanding is a research group of Martine Hausberger. And she's from France, I think from Rennes. I have checked it for the German podcast. I think it was Rennes. And every time when I have a thought that is a little bit thought-provoking and I'm trying to find evidence to it, I'm very often ending up with a paper that is coming from herself or one of her students. So her papers have constantly shown that calm, compliant, or unproblematic behavior is not a reliable indicator of good welfare. Horses that aren't troublemakers are not necessarily having good welfare. Horses kept in restrictive housing and management systems very often show, in general, a reduced behavioral diversity and increased passivity, and very often also depression-like states. Maybe you have already heard about the expression learned helplessness that is coming into the picture here, but it doesn't have to go so far. Already long before we are seeing learned helplessness, we are seeing reduced behavioral diversity. And very importantly, these are often the horses that are described as easy, quiet, or well-behaved. So very often when a student is coming to me with a very well-behaved gelding, I am starting to get very interested in very big ears. And one key paper is highlighting how social and cultural bias leads to human misinterpretation, adaptation, as well-being. And here we are again. It's, of course, a paper from Martine Hausberger and Lessemble and Henri from 21. We are linking it in the show notes. And basically, the paper is discussing that it is difficult to detect welfare in a non-human species. And they are discussing also that our baseline as humans is shifting the longer we are in the industry. Earlier work is also showing that adaptation to human demands does not automatically reflect positive emotional states. And then we have a lot of more research on learned helplessness in horses. And that is adding, from my perspective, another critical layer. We are adding all the resources. I don't want to discuss that in detail here. Now, we have discussed that a little bit when we were looking at the emotions of the horse. We have also discussed the interconnectedness in between exterior, posture, and welfare. And we have also discussed how this can change in both directions. So if you want to dive deeper in that, I recommend you to listen to the podcast about equine emotions that we have streamed, in November, or to continue reading in the resources here. To make it short, adaptation is simply not a proof of well-being. And also, if we are only affected or only seeing horses, for example, that are obese, or only exposed to horses that are showing top-line syndrome, that is what will become normal for us. So it's a little bit challenging for us to read that and to confront ourselves with that, because it's not always so comfortable to look at our perception, our own perception, from that angle. So if a horse is very well adapted, that doesn't mean it feels very well. It only tells us that a system is still functioning under the given conditions. When we are now taking the perspective from human trauma research, then the trauma perspective is that behavior is survival. And in human trauma research, this perspective is very well established. So what we can discuss now is how much trauma can a horse have and how does it look like in horses. And there, let's agree to disagree. There, I'm very often, you have heard me saying very often, that if a horse is very reactive, that is very likely not a traumatized horse. That is a very normal horse that is showing abnormal behavior or normal behavior in an abnormal situation. So the behavior is not a malfunction, it's a survival strategy because the horse feels that it needs to protect its own body, for example, or get out of the situation or something. But let's take a step back and look at the different states of the nervous system. There we would have fight, flight, freeze, and less known fawn. And fawn is when we see this extreme nervousness, this people pleaser, for example, that would be a typical fawn response. Also, the overreactive dogs that are very busy with licking you all the time and stuff. That would be a fawn response, a dog that has difficulties to relax. And I'm also seeing that sometimes in horses. That is not pathological, but a logical response to prolonged stress and a lack of safety. When we apply this lens to horses, many behavioral patterns suddenly make a lot of sense. We see apathy as a freeze state or also dissociation. We see overcompliance as fawn. We see explosiveness as fight or flight response. From this perspective, behavior is not at all the problem anymore. It's even the opposite. It's the best available solution that the nervous system has in that very moment. And this is where training often goes wrong. We try to suppress behavior that is actually protective. And then very often we are getting into more and more trouble. And we are also bringing the horse into more and more trouble. After moving to Norway and building our farm with direct access to the Utmark and, giving the horses choices, that was also a new way of living for me and my ponies. We observed something that was, I would say, was very difficult to ignore because the behavior of our horses changed, not exactly overnight and not very dramatically, but consistently, day by day. They simply became calmer. It felt like they were starting to take a deep breath, and the flight behavior decreased. Self-regulation improved, on the other hand, and we got a better homeostasis. What was also interesting is that maybe if you're listening to the podcast since a while, you have heard me talking about laterality, and maybe you have heard me also talking to the ladies that have been doing the research in laterality, and I am a big fan of that. But when we are talking about laterality, we are always talking about sensory laterality and motor laterality and how they are influencing each other. If you haven't heard about that before, I'm very much recommending you to listen to the podcast about laterality. It's actually very good. I've got a very good one, especially the English version, to dive deeper into that topic. So it has something to do that the senses of the horse are having a sidedness and that the left eye is more active when in a stress situation, while the right eye is more active when in a social safe situation. That is normal. But does that also mean that it is normal that all horses are left-sided after the age of 3 or 4? Or is that something that is due to the environment they are exposed to? And that is something that was keeping me thinking here at home in our environment, because of course my horses are still having the same wiring in the brain that they had before. But and if we are having a moose hunt in the neighborhood, then we see laterality. If there's a moose running over the riding arena, then I very clearly see laterality. But in everyday life, I don't see laterality. My horses are approaching me from the right as from the left side, in the darkness, in the daylight, in whatever, with food and without. And what I definitely don't have anymore is a good and a bad side. So I don't have motor laterality, at least not so strong that it would be really, really visible. And it's important to say that very clearly. I believe in laterality research. I'm seeing that when I'm going out teaching. I'm seeing that not so much in my student horses, but when I'm having a new horse and when I'm going into, especially on weekend clinics and courses, I very clearly see laterality. So I do believe that this is very profound research that we need to listen to. But it's not normal that we see such a strong motor laterality. And I think that is important to say. And also, it's not normal that we see such a strong motor sensory laterality. That just means we have horses under very, unnormal conditions responding very normally. And for my horses, it's important to say we didn't train differently, but we changed the context. Which brings us back to the very uncomfortable question: what if much of what we consider normal horse behavior is already biologically abnormal, and that is our baseline? It's thought-provoking, and maybe you need to take a breather here. Maybe you need to take a break, because we go even one layer deeper. I had this week a very interesting conversation to one of the summit speakers, to Lucy Rees, and it was keeping me busy. I had to think about that for a very long time. If you're hearing what I'm telling you now, you think, of course, why haven't I thought about that before? But it's still not normal to think that way. So let's talk about development, co-regulation, and generations. Because what we all know, or maybe you've heard about that, is that a nervous system does not learn regulation in isolation. It learns regulation in relationship. It learns regulation from a safe person, from somebody it has bound to, not from the guy who's delivering the milk, but from a mother, a father, somebody you have a strong social bound to. So now let's talk about early weaning. Let's talk about weaning with 6 months, and then let's talk about putting the horses all together with other foals. So let's say we have 10 or 20 6 months old, but no mother and father in relationship. So no co-regulation by older horses, or a random older horse they don't have a bound to. That is restricting the social learning environment extremely. So how is a young nervous system supposed to learn self-regulation if it never gets co-regulation? And what happens when these conditions don't affect just individuals, but continue across generations? And what happens if we are taking the horses constantly early on out of their families, put them together in this kindergarten group that doesn't have a grown-up to regulate? And then these are the individuals that are supposed to raise the next generation. I mean, I think it is very clear that the state of the nervous system will not get better generation by generation. And that is so interesting if we have the chance to see horses that are in a constant family environment, and also see their offspring and see if there's a father present, how he's interacting with raising the ponies, and what that means if we have a horse that is fully able to regulate, to self-regulate. What is that doing with trailer rides? What is it doing with, different challenges later on in horse life, and also with the interaction with the rider? We have a completely different baseline, and as when we are having this tiny little soul that doesn't know how to control its own nervous system. I thought it was very thought-provoking when Lucy was discussing that, and she will discuss that also in the summit, that a lot of what we are calling conflict behavior is actually a horse that has never had co-regulation. And this is one of the reasons why it's not enough to look at behavior in isolation. If we want to understand why horses behave the way they do, we need to ask deeper questions. How do they perceive the world? How safe is it? How predictable is it? And how controllable? That is also why we have picked for this summit, for this year, the topic inside the horse's mind. It grew out exactly of these questions, not as a method-based summit, but as a space to bridge science and practice and to look beneath the surface. Sorry. Because before behavior becomes problematic, it is just very interesting to look at all the factors around it. So let's put it in a nutshell. Maybe your horse's behavior is not the puzzle that needs fixing. Maybe it is the most honest information you're receiving about context, history, and nervous system state. And maybe the most uncomfortable question isn't how do I get rid of this behavior, but what makes this behavior necessary right now? I am inviting you into the think tank with us. I hope to hear a little bit of your feedback. What are you thinking about that? And I hope you will be with us when at the end of March, from the 19th to the 22nd March, we are thinking about all the perspectives that belong to inside the horse's mind. Tickets are available from the 15th of February, but you can already hop onto the waiting list if you want to. We will link the waiting list into the show notes and get all informations early and also a little discount code. So we see you hopefully then, but before, of course, next week back on the podcast. Enjoy the weekend, guys.